The billionaire Playboy bet he'd never settle, until a black woman won his heart without even trying. It started in a small liquor store in Los Angeles. He walked in looking for directions. She was behind the counter, tired, guarded, done with fairy tales. One conversation, one smile, and the billionaire who thought he'd seen it all found something he never expected: home. But when love crosses worlds, money, pride, and fear will test everything they build. This is how a liquor store clerk and a billionaire rewrote what forever means. Before we dive into this story, hit that subscribe button and drop a comment telling us where you're watching from, because this journey is about to take you on a ride you won't forget. 6 months earlier, Martin Park's world was exactly how he designed it: controlled, predictable, and completely devoid of emotional complications. At 32, he had built Park Innovations from a garage startup into a tech empire worth $3 billion. His face graced the covers of Forbes and Fortune, and his penthouse in Manhattan offered views that most people only saw in movies. But Martin's most prized possession wasn't his money or his companies. It was his carefully constructed emotional fortress, the one that kept everyone at arm's length, especially women. He had rules: never date anyone for more than 3 months, never make promises he couldn't break, and never, ever let anyone close enough to matter. His best friend and business partner, James Chen, called it the Martin Park Playbook, a systematic approach to relationships that prioritized pleasure over depth, convenience over connection. Martin wore it like armor, because love, real love, was for people who hadn't watched their parents destroy each other in a 15-year war. Disguised as a marriage, meanwhile, 3,000 miles away in a struggling neighborhood in Los Angeles, Madeline Graves was living a completely different story. At 28, she worked 6 days a week at Garcia's Liquor and Wine, a small family-owned shop tucked between a laundromat and a pawn shop on Crenshaw Boulevard. Her shifts were long, her feet always hurt, and her paycheck barely covered rent for the studio apartment she shared with her younger sister, Tanya. But Madeline had something Martin's billions couldn't buy: an unshakable belief that kindness was currency, that every person who walked through those doors deserved to be seen, really seen. She remembered names, asked about sick relatives, celebrated small victories with customers who had nowhere else to share them. Her boss, Mrs. Garcia, said Madeline had a gift: the ability to make people feel like they mattered. It came naturally to her, this generosity of spirit. Maybe because she knew what it felt like to be invisible, growing up in foster care, bouncing between homes where she was just another mouth to feed, just another problem to manage. So she built her own family, one smile, one conversation, one moment of genuine connection at a time. The call to adventure came on a Tuesday afternoon in March, unremarkable in every way except that it changed everything. Martin was in Los Angeles for a meeting with potential investors, a last-minute trip he hadn't wanted to make, and his rental car's GPS had malfunctioned, leaving him lost in a neighborhood his driver would have steered him away from. He needed directions, and his phone was dead. So he pulled over at the first shop he saw, Garcia's Liquor and Wine. The bell above the door chimed as he walked in, and that's when he saw her. Madeline was helping an elderly man choose a bottle of wine for his anniversary. Her voice warm and patient, her smile so genuine it seemed to light up the dingy store. Martin stood frozen, struck by something he couldn't name, watching her laugh at the old man's joke, watching her carefully wrap the bottle like it was precious. When she finally noticed him, her smile didn't falter, didn't calculate his worth from his $5,000 suit or his Rolex. She just said, "Hi there, how can I help you today?" And Martin Park, who had commanded boardrooms and negotiated billion-dollar deals, forgot how to speak. He mumbled something about needing directions, and Madeline came around the counter, pulling out her phone to help him. She smelled like vanilla and something floral, and when she leaned close to show him the map, he noticed the small scar above her left eyebrow, the way her natural hair was pulled back in a simple bun, the silver cross necklace that hung just below her collarbone. She gave him detailed directions, warned him about construction on 5th Street, and then smiled again before returning to her post behind the register. Martin thanked her, walked back to his car, and sat there for 5 full minutes, trying to understand what had just happened. He'd met thousands of beautiful women, dated models and actresses and heiresses, but none of them had ever made him feel this, like he'd been sleepwalking through his life and someone had just shaken him awake. He looked back at the store, saw her through the window laughing with another customer, and made a decision that would unravel everything he thought he knew about himself. He went back inside, but here's where the refusal of the call begins. Because Martin Park didn't do complications, and everything about Madeline Graves screamed complication. She was real in a way that terrified him, unpolished, unimpressed by wealth, completely outside the sanitized world he'd built. So when he walked back into that store, he told himself he was just being friendly, maybe flirtatious, nothing serious. He bought a bottle of wine he didn't need, expensive enough to make a statement, and when Madeline rang it up, he asked if she knew any good restaurants in the area. She laughed, a sound that did something strange to his chest, and said, "Not anywhere you'd want to eat," gesturing at his suit. He left with the wine and without her number, but he couldn't stop thinking about her. For 3 days, through his investor meetings and conference calls, through dinners at Michelin-starred restaurants with people who bored him to death, all he could think about was the woman in the liquor store with the genuine smile. On the 4th day, he went back. This time, Madeline was alone in the store, restocking shelves, and when the bell chimed, she turned around and recognized him immediately. "Back for more wine?" she asked, and there was something playful in her voice, something that suggested she knew exactly why he was really there. Martin, who never stumbled, who never showed uncertainty, found himself grinning like an idiot. "Actually," he said, "I came back to ask you to dinner." And just like that, the mask slipped, the careful control cracked, and for the first time in 15 years, Martin Park let himself want something he couldn't predict or control. Madeline studied him for a long moment, her dark eyes searching his face for something. Sincerity maybe, or danger. "I don't date customers," she finally said, but she was smiling, and Martin felt that smile like a physical thing. "Then I'll never shop here again," he replied. Problem solved. She laughed again, and this time he knew he was lost. But Madeline had her own refusal brewing, her own walls built from different rubble. She'd been burned before, badly, by a man who made promises he never intended to keep, who took and took until there was nothing left to give. She'd learned to guard her heart, to be generous with everyone except herself, because giving herself away had nearly destroyed her. And this man, this impossibly handsome stranger in his designer suit, he screamed danger in a different language, the language of temporary, of too good to be true, of heartbreak waiting to happen. So when he asked again, more earnestly this time, she hesitated. "I don't even know your name," she said. "Martin," he replied. Martin Park. He waited for recognition, for the usual widening of eyes that came when people connected his face to his fortune. But Madeline just nodded. "Madeline Graves," she said, and held out her hand. When their palms touched, something electric passed between them, something neither could deny. "One dinner," she said. "That's all I'm promising." That dinner turned into 3 hours at a small Ethiopian restaurant Madeline chose, far from the pretentious establishments Martin usually frequented. She told him about growing up in foster care, about her sister Tanya who was studying nursing, about her dreams of opening her own business someday, maybe a bookstore or a coffee shop where people could gather and feel welcome. Martin, who usually dominated conversations with stories of his success, found himself listening, really listening, mesmerized by her honesty, her vulnerability, the way she turned pain into purpose instead of armor. When he finally told her what he did for a living, she didn't fawn or calculate. She just asked him if he was happy. The question hit him like a punch, because nobody had ever asked him that. Nobody had ever cared about anything except what he could do for them, what doors he could open, what opportunities he could provide. "I don't know," he admitted, and saying it out loud felt like stepping off a cliff. The mentor in Martin's journey came from an unexpected source, Mrs. Garcia, the 70-year-old owner of the liquor store who had watched Madeline grow from a shy part-timer into the heart of her small business. When Martin started showing up regularly, bringing Madeline lunch, waiting to walk her home after her shifts, Mrs. Garcia pulled him aside one day with the fierce protectiveness of a mother bear. "That girl has been through hell," she said, her accent thick, her eyes sharp. "She gives everyone everything, and most people just take. If you're here to play games, to add another trophy to your collection, you walk away now before you break something precious." Martin stood there, chastened and challenged, realizing that this was the first time in years anyone had demanded something from him beyond money or business acumen. "I'm not playing games," he said quietly. "I'm terrified, but I'm not playing." Mrs. Garcia studied him for a long moment, then nodded. "Good," she said, "because she deserves someone who's brave enough to be terrified." Those words became Martin's compass, the reminder that love wasn't about control or predictability. It was about showing up scared and doing it anyway. For Madeline, the mentor came in the form of her younger sister, Tanya, who had watched her siblings sacrifice everything for everyone else and was determined to see her finally choose herself. 2 weeks into whatever was happening between Madeline and Martin, Tanya cornered her in their tiny kitchen, eyes blazing with protective fury. "I see how you look at him," Tanya said, "like you're waiting for the other shoe to drop, like you're already preparing for him to leave." Madeline tried to deflect, to minimize, but Tanya wasn't having it. "You spent 3 years putting yourself back together after Marcus, 3 years learning to trust yourself again, and now you're so scared of getting hurt that you won't even let yourself feel happy." The words landed like stones in water, creating ripples Madeline couldn't ignore. "What if he's different?" Tanya pressed. "What if you miss out on something real because you're too busy protecting yourself from something that might never happen?" That night, lying in bed, Madeline let herself imagine it. A future where she wasn't always bracing for impact, where she could fall without fear of the landing. It was terrifying and exhilarating in equal measure. The crossing of the first threshold happened on a Saturday in April, when Martin invited Madeline to a charity gala his company was sponsoring. She almost said no. The thought of entering his world, of being surrounded by wealth and privilege that felt like a foreign country, made her stomach twist with anxiety. But something in his voice when he asked, a vulnerability she was learning to recognize, made her say yes. Martin sent a car for her, and when she stepped out in a simple black dress she'd borrowed from a friend, she felt completely out of place among the designer gowns and glittering jewelry. But then Martin saw her, and the way his face transformed, the way he looked at her like she was the only person in the room, made everything else fade away. He introduced her to everyone as Madeline, not as his date or his companion, just as herself. And when a condescending socialite asked what she did for a living, Martin squeezed her hand and said, "She runs the best wine shop in LA," with such pride that Madeline felt tears prick her eyes. That night, on the dance floor with a string quartet playing and Martin's arms around her, she let herself cross the threshold, let herself admit that this was becoming something she couldn't walk away from. But crossing that threshold meant entering the territory of tests, allies and enemies, and they came faster than either of them expected. Martin's ex-girlfriend, Vanessa Crawford, a fashion designer from old money who had expected to eventually become Mrs. Park, showed up at his office unannounced 3 weeks after the gala. She'd seen photos from the event, seen Martin with Madeline, and came armed with subtle poison disguised as concern. "She's lovely," Vanessa said, her smile sharp as glass. "Very authentic. But Martin, darling, be realistic. What happens when the novelty wears off? When you're at business dinners and charity events, and she can't keep up? When your investors start questioning your judgment?" Her words burrowed into the doubts Martin had been trying to ignore, the whispers that told him he was being foolish, that people from different worlds couldn't build a life together. He said nothing, but Vanessa saw the flicker of uncertainty in his eyes and smiled. "I'm not saying this to be cruel," she continued. "I'm saying it because I care about you. Don't throw away everything you've built for something that can't last." After she left, Martin sat in his office staring at the skyline, wondering if she was right. Meanwhile, Madeline was facing her own tests at the liquor store, where regular customers had started treating her differently. Since word spread about her dating a billionaire, some were excited, living vicariously through what they saw as a fairy tale, but others were bitter, accusing her of selling out, of thinking she was too good for the neighborhood now. One afternoon, a customer she'd known for years sneered, when you move to his mansion. You gonna forget about us little people." The words stung because they touched her deepest fear, that in reaching for something with Martin, she was somehow betraying who she was, abandoning the life and people that had shaped her. She went home that night and cried in the shower, wondering if love was supposed to feel like choosing between two parts of yourself, like you couldn't have both the person you were becoming and the person you'd always been. The allies in their story came from unexpected places. James Chen, Martin's best friend and business partner, had been skeptical at first, watching Martin's carefully constructed walls crumble with a mixture of fascination and concern. But one evening, over drinks at Martin's penthouse, James saw something that changed his mind. Martin was on the phone with Madeline, who was dealing with a difficult situation at the store, and James watched his friend transform, become patient and encouraging and present in a way he'd never been with anyone else. When Martin hung up, James said, "I've never seen you like this." Martin looked at him, defensive. "Like what?" James smiled, happy, genuinely, unguardedly happy. "Whatever you're doing, don't stop." That endorsement, from the person who knew him best, gave Martin permission to stop questioning and start believing. For Madeline, an unlikely ally emerged in the form of Martin's housekeeper, Rosa, a 60-year-old woman from El Salvador who had worked for Martin for 5 years and seen countless women come and go. The first time Madeline visited Martin's penthouse, Rosa watched her with the suspicion of someone who'd witnessed too many performative relationships. But then she saw Madeline in the kitchen, asking if she could help make coffee, chatting in broken Spanish about Rosa's grandchildren, treating her like a person instead of invisible help. Later, Rosa pulled Martin aside and said in her accented English that one, she has a good heart. Don't be stupid and lose her. Coming from Rosa, who never commented on his personal life. The words carried weight Martin couldn't ignore. But the enemies weren't all external. The biggest threats came from within, from the fears and insecurities both Martin and Madeline carried like shrapnel in their souls. Martin's fear manifested as control, trying to solve Madeline's problems with money, offering to pay off her student loans, to buy her a new car, to move her into a better apartment. Each offer came from genuine care but landed like an insult, like he was trying to fix her instead of love her. After the third time he tried to write a check to solve something, Madeline exploded. "I don't need you to rescue me," she said, voice shaking with anger and hurt. "I need you to see me as an equal, not a project." The fight was brutal, both of them saying things they regretted, exposing wounds they'd kept hidden. Martin accused her of being too proud to accept help. Madeline accused him of thinking money could buy his way out of actually being vulnerable. They didn't speak for 3 days, both convinced it was over. Madeline's fear manifested differently, as self-sabotage, as picking fights over small things because big things were too scary to confront. She started pulling away, canceling dates, responding to his texts with increasing coldness, building walls brick by brick because walls were safer than windows. Tanya watched it happen with frustration, finally confronting her sister in the parking lot of their apartment building. "You're doing it again," Tanya said. "You're leaving before you can be left." Madeline tried to deny it, but the truth sat heavy in her chest. She was terrified, not of Martin hurting her, but of how much it would destroy her if he did. The depth of her feelings for him was unlike anything she'd ever experienced, and that intensity felt dangerous, like standing at the edge of a cliff with no way to know if there was water below or rocks. The approaching of the cave, the moment when they had to face their deepest fears, came on a humid evening in June. Martin showed up at the liquor store right before closing, looking exhausted and desperate. "We need to talk," he said, and Madeline felt her heart drop into her stomach. They went to a nearby park, sat on a bench under streetlights, surrounded by the sounds of the city. And for the first time, they stopped performing, stopped protecting, and started being completely honest. Martin told her about his parents, about watching his mother's love turn into bitterness when his father's affairs became impossible to ignore, about promising himself he'd never be that vulnerable, never give anyone that much power over his happiness. "And then I met you," he said, voice cracking, "and everything I thought I knew about myself turned out to be wrong. I'm terrified, Madeline. I'm terrified that I'll hurt you, that I'm not capable of this, that I'll turn into my father and destroy something beautiful, because I don't know how to be different. Madeline sat there, tears streaming down her face, and told him her truth about Marcus, the boyfriend who had seemed perfect until he wasn't, who had isolated her from friends, controlled her money, made her feel small and worthless until she barely recognized herself, about the 2 years it took to leave, to rebuild, to remember who she was before he tried to erase her. I swore I'd never let anyone have that kind of power again, she whispered. And then you walked into that store, and I felt it happening, felt myself falling, and I panicked. Because what if I'm wrong about you? What if this is just another version of the same story, and I'm too blind to see it? They sat in the darkness, surrounded by their trauma and fear, and Martin reached for her hand. What if we're both wrong? He said softly. What if we're so busy protecting ourselves from what might happen that we destroy what we actually have? The provocation, the central crisis that would test everything they'd built, came crashing down to weeks later in the form of a business opportunity Martin couldn't refuse. Park Innovations had the chance to acquire a struggling tech company in Singapore, a deal that would cement Martin's position as a global player and potentially double his net worth. But it meant relocating for at least a year, maybe longer, and the decision had to be made within a week. Martin's board was unanimous. This was the move that would define his legacy. James was already packing. Everything Martin had worked for was pointing him towards Singapore. Everything except Madeline. When he told her over dinner at their favorite Ethiopian restaurant, she went very still, fork frozen halfway to her mouth. A year, she repeated, and he heard the distance already creeping into her voice. Maybe longer. She put down her fork, and Martin saw her building the walls again, saw her retreating to somewhere he couldn't reach. Come with me, he said, the words tumbling out before he'd fully thought them through. Come to Singapore. We could make it work. But even as he said it, he knew how it sounded, how it asked her to abandon everything, her sister, her job, her life, to follow him into his world with no guarantee of anything. And do what? Madeline asked, voice hollow. Be your girlfriend in a foreign country where I don't know anyone, don't have a job, don't have a purpose except waiting for you to come home from building your empire? The bitterness in her voice cut him, but he couldn't deny the truth of it. He hadn't thought about her life, only about not losing her. That's not what I meant, he started, but she was already standing up. Yes, it is, she said quietly, because at the end of the day, your life is what matters. Your career, your opportunities, your legacy, and I'm supposed to just fit in wherever there's space. She grabbed her purse, and Martin felt panic rising in his chest. Madeline, please, he said, standing up, reaching for her, but she stepped back, and the distance between them felt like miles. I need to think, she said, and walked out of the restaurant, leaving Martin standing there with the wreckage of their dinner and the growing certainty that he'd just lost the most important thing in his life. He went home to his empty penthouse, poured himself a drink he didn't want, and stared at the contract sitting on his desk. Singapore, the deal of a lifetime, everything he'd worked for. And suddenly, standing in his monument to success, surrounded by expensive art and panoramic views, Martin Park realized he'd never felt more alone, more hollow, more utterly and completely lost. The next morning, he called James and said 3 words that changed everything. I can't go. James arrived at the penthouse within the hour, looking like Martin had announced he was joining a monastery. What do you mean you can't go? James demanded. This is Singapore. This is everything we've been working toward for 5 years. Martin sat on the couch, head in his hands, and said, I know. James paced the room, frustration radiating from every movement. This is about her, isn't it? About Madeline. Martin, I supported this relationship. I encouraged it. But you can't throw away your entire career for a woman you've known for 3 months. The words hung in the air, rational and reasonable and completely wrong. Martin looked up at his best friend and said, what's the point of building an empire if I'm alone in it? What's the point of success if I can't share it with someone who makes me feel like a person instead of a brand? James stared at him, and something in his expression softened. You really love her, he said, and it wasn't a question. I really love her, Martin confirmed, saying it out loud for the first time, feeling the truth of it settle into his bones like coming home. But love alone wasn't enough to fix what had broken between them. Madeline spent 3 days not answering Martin's calls, not responding to his texts, locked in her apartment with Tanya, who wisely said nothing and just brought her tea and tissues. On the 4th day, Mrs. Garcia called her into the office at the liquor store, shut the door, and said, "Enough. You're miserable. He's miserable, and you're both too stubborn to do anything about it." Madeline tried to protest, but Mrs. Garcia held up a hand. "I've been married for 47 years, she said. "You know what I've learned? Love isn't about finding someone perfect. It's about finding someone worth fighting for, even when it's hard. Especially when it's hard." She leaned forward, her weathered hands folding over Madeline's. "That man looks at you like you hung the moon, and you look at him like he might take it down. You're so scared of being hurt that you're hurting yourself. The question isn't whether he'll disappoint you, Mija. Everyone disappoints everyone eventually. The question is whether he's worth staying for when he does." Those words circled in Madeline's mind as she finally, on the 5th day, agreed to meet Martin at the park where they'd first been honest with each other. He was already there when she arrived, sitting on the same bench, looking like he hadn't slept in days. When he saw her, he stood up, and the relief on his face was so profound it almost broke her. "I turned down Singapore," he said before she could speak. Madeline froze, processing the words. "You what?" Martin stepped closer, careful not to invade her space, and said, "I turned it down. Called the board yesterday and told them I'm staying in LA. James is going to head the acquisition, and I'll consult remotely. But I'm not leaving." Madeline felt anger flash through her, hot and unexpected. "You can't do that," she said. "You can't make decisions like that because of me. You can't sacrifice your career. You can't." "I'm not sacrificing anything," Martin interrupted gently. "I'm choosing something. There's a difference. But what if this doesn't work?" Madeline asked, voice breaking. "What if we try and we fail and you resent me for the opportunity you gave up? What if I'm not worth it?" And there it was, the core wound. The belief she'd carried since childhood that she wasn't worth staying for. That everyone eventually left because she wasn't enough. Martin moved closer, his hands cupping her face, forcing her to look at him. "You are worth it," he said fiercely. "You are worth every opportunity, every deal, every dollar I've ever made. None of it matters if I can't share it with you. And yes, maybe we'll fail. Maybe we'll screw this up in ways we can't even imagine yet. But I'd rather fail at trying to build something real with you than succeed at being alone." Madeline felt the tears come, felt years of walls crumbling, and whispered, "I'm so scared." Martin's thumb brushed away her tears. "Me too," he said. "Let's be scared together." The reward, the resolution of their crisis, came not in grand gestures, but in small choices made over the following weeks. Martin started seeing a therapist, working through the trauma of his parents' marriage, learning how to be vulnerable without feeling weak. Madeline did the same, unpacking the damage Marcus had done, learning to trust her own judgment again, to believe she deserved good things without waiting for them to be taken away. They learned each other's languages, Martin understanding that Madeline's independence wasn't rejection, but survival. Madeline understanding that Martin's desire to help wasn't control, but care. They fought, silly and honestly, and learned to fight fair, to take breaks when things got heated, to come back and finish conversations instead of letting resentment fester. They built something neither had experienced before, a partnership based on mutual respect and genuine friendship. Not just attraction and chemistry. Martin did something that shocked everyone, including himself. He sold his penthouse and bought a modest house in Madeline's neighborhood, close enough to the liquor store that she could walk to work. His business associates were horrified. His accountant tried to talk him out of it, but Martin had never been more certain of anything. He wanted to be in her world, not demand she exist only in his. Madeline, in turn, started attending business functions with him, not as arm candy but as his partner, learning about his work, offering insights from her unique perspective that came from years of reading people. At the liquor store, she had a gift for seeing through pretense, for identifying which potential investors were genuine and which were playing games. and Martin learned to trust her instincts implicitly. They became a team, complementing each other's strengths, covering each other's blind spots. The path back to their ordinary world, now transformed, involved integrating their separate lives into something shared. Tanya became a regular fixture at Sunday dinners at Martin's new house, teasing him mercilessly and slowly becoming the little sister he never had. Mrs. Garcia closed the liquor store for a day so Martin could throw her a surprise birthday party, inviting the entire neighborhood and footing the bill without making it obvious. He funded Tanya's nursing school tuition, structuring it as a scholarship through his foundation so Madeline couldn't refuse it as charity. He learned to cook badly, and Madeline learned to let him fail without trying to take over. They planted a garden in the backyard, something Martin had never imagined doing, and found unexpected joy in getting dirt under their fingernails, in watching things grow because they'd tended them together. The resurrection, their transformation, was visible in how they moved through the world. Martin, who had spent years building walls, became known for his generosity, not just financially but emotionally, showing up for people in ways that couldn't be solved with a check. He started a mentorship program, connecting successful entrepreneurs with kids from underserved communities. Inspired by Madeline's belief that everyone deserved to be seen, he learned to measure success not by acquisitions and net worth, but by relationships and impact, by whether he was becoming someone he actually liked. Madeline, who had spent years making herself small, started taking up space, started believing she belonged in rooms she'd once thought were beyond her reach. She enrolled in business classes at the community college, started working on a plan for her own bookstore, let herself dream beyond survival into purpose and passion. Martin's belief in her became the mirror she learned to see herself in, until she didn't need the mirror anymore because she could see it herself. 8 months after their crisis, on a February evening with rain tapping against the windows, Martin found Madeline in their living room, surrounded by business plans and loan applications for the bookstore she was finally ready to open. He sat down beside her, picking up one of the documents, and said, "I want to invest." She looked at him, eyebrow raised. As a silent partner, he clarified quickly, "Your vision, your decisions, your business. I just want to help make it happen." Madeline studied him for a long moment, then said, 20% equity, and you have to work the register one Saturday a month. Martin laughed, the sound rich and genuine. "Deal." They shook on it, and then Madeline said, "I love you, you know. I don't say it enough, but I do. You've changed my life." Martin pulled her close, pressing a kiss to her forehead. "You've changed mine," he said. "You taught me that the bravest thing you can do isn't building a business or making a fortune. It's letting someone see you, really see you, and trusting they'll stay." The return with the elixir came on a June afternoon, exactly 1 year after their confrontation in the park, when Martin took Madeline back to Garcia's Liquor and Wine, the place where their story began. The store was closed, which was unusual, and when Madeline walked in, confused, she found it transformed. Fairy lights hung from the ceiling, flowers filled every corner, and in the center of the store stood Martin, holding a small velvet box, surrounded by everyone who mattered. Mrs. Garcia and Rosa, Tanya and James, regular customers from the store, colleagues from Martin's company, all the people from their separate worlds that had become one world, their world. A year ago, Martin said, voice steady despite the tears in his eyes, "I walked into this store looking for directions and found my home. You've taught me what it means to be brave, to be vulnerable, to measure wealth in moments instead of money. You've made me better than I ever thought I could be." He dropped to one knee, and Madeline's hands flew to her mouth, tears already streaming down her face. "Madeline Graves, you are the smartest, kindest, most beautiful person I've ever known. You see people, really see them, including me, especially me, even the parts I tried to hide. I don't want to spend another day without you. I don't want to build anything unless you're beside me. Will you marry me?" The store erupted in cheers before Madeline could even answer, but she was already nodding, already saying yes through her tears, already pulling Martin up so she could kiss him. He slid the ring onto her finger, a simple band with a single diamond, elegant and understated, exactly her style. and held her close while their combined families celebrated around them. Mrs. Garcia popped champagne. Rosa cried happy tears. Tanya hugged James, who looked suspiciously misty-eyed himself. And for a moment, in that small liquor store in a struggling neighborhood, everything was perfect. Later that night, alone in their house with the engagement ring catching the light, Madeline and Martin lay in bed talking about their future. They would open the bookstore together, creating a community space that served coffee and hosted local artists and provided free tutoring for neighborhood kids. Martin would continue running Park Innovations, but with a new focus on sustainable technology and social impact. They would get married in the spring, a small ceremony in Mrs. Garcia's backyard. Nothing fancy or pretentious, just the people who mattered and the love that had transformed them both. They would build a life that honored both their stories, that made space for ambition and compassion, success and service, individual dreams and shared purpose. They would fight and make up, struggle and triumph, hurt each other and heal each other, because that's what real love was. Not the absence of problems, but the commitment to work through them together. Do you ever regret it? Madeline asked quietly. Turning down Singapore, changing your whole life? Martin was quiet for a moment, then said, I used to think my life was about building something bigger than myself, about leaving a legacy that would outlast me. But now I realize the legacy I want isn't a company or a fortune. It's this, it's us. It's teaching kids from neighborhoods like yours that they deserve a seat at any table. It's creating something with you that makes the world a little bit better. That's worth more than any acquisition or board seat or penthouse view. He turned to face her, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. You didn't change my life, Madeline. You gave me one. Everything before you was just existing. This is living. Madeline kissed him then, slow and deep, pouring into it everything she couldn't say. All the gratitude and love and hope for their future. When they finally broke apart, she said, You know what the crazy thing is? That day you walked into the store, I almost didn't come to work. I was tired. I thought about calling in sick. If I had, we never would have met. Everything would be different. Martin pulled her closer, his heart beating steady against her ear. I don't believe in fate, he said, but I believe we were supposed to find each other. Maybe not that specific day in that specific way, but somehow. Because you're my person, Madeline. You're my home, and I'm going to spend the rest of my life making sure you know how extraordinary you are, how loved you are, how grateful I am that you took a chance on a terrified billionaire who didn't know what he was missing until he saw your smile. Outside their window, Los Angeles hummed with life, millions of stories unfolding simultaneously, people falling in love and out of it, making mistakes and finding redemption, building dreams and watching them crumble and building again. And in their small house in a neighborhood that Martin's former associates would have driven past without noticing, to people who shouldn't have worked on paper but were perfect in reality, held each other close and planned their forever. The billionaire playboy who thought he'd never settle had found something worth more than all his success combined. The kind-hearted saleswoman who thought she'd never trust again had discovered that the right person was worth the risk, and together they built something neither could have created alone. A love story that started with a smile in a liquor store and became a testament to the transformative power of seeing and being seen, of choosing vulnerability over safety, of believing that the best things in life are worth being terrified for. Their journey had only just begun, but they were ready, scared and hopeful and completely committed to writing the rest of their story together, one brave choice at a time.